Hello, welcome to Facebook Live. What sort of arguments do you have? Do you have arguments that go round and round in circles and get absolutely nowhere beyond making you and your partner terribly unhappy? Do you think you've got a solution and then suddenly it just disappears because actually the agreement never gets followed, or your partner actively undermines you by not actually following through on what you thought was the agreement? If these sound familiar, welcome to this Facebook Live where I'm going to give you 10 different ways to have a constructive argument. And what I mean by a constructive argument is one where you don't end up hating each other, and actually at the end you feel closer because you've been working together and you've actually resolved a particular issue. Now, being Facebook Live, this means that you can participate as well. You can ask me a question and I will help you out. Is there something that you and your partner always do that actually stops you from having a good argument? And by a good argument, I mean one that is actually constructive. If you want to know what you could do differently, send me a question. Tell me where you are. It's always good to hear from you and for you to participate in this Facebook Live. I'm going to go through my 10 things that you can do to have a better and more constructive argument, and then I'll take your questions. So, have you got a question for me? Post it and I will answer it as soon as I've gone through my 10 points. So let's start with the first of my 10 points. And my first of those points is to practice with smaller issues. Now, if you've got a really big issue between the two of you, say for example you don't like the way he treats your mother and you've been arguing about it for the last 20 years, that is not the subject to talk about if you're going to start trying out my constructive manners. You can actually move up to that one, but first of all, you've really got to get some confidence that you can actually sort out your issues. So start with something small like towels left on the floor, because you're going to have a chance of solving that one, and the feelings are not going to be too strong, and therefore you're going to be able to relax and remember my 10 points. So the first one, practice with small issues. Right, let's move on to the second one. Of my 10 ways to have a constructive argument. I'd like you to tackle it in a timely manner. What do I mean by a timely manner? Well, the first thing to say is that you don't wait until you've got to the point that you're absolutely about to scream on the subject, because you're not going to be calm, you're not going to be able to listen, and you won't have a constructive argument. So it's a timely manner. Actually, often when it comes up. Don't wait for 10 rotten, nasty things like towels left on the floor to get you to the point you're about to explode, because that's not a timely manner. You've let all these irritations build up to a crunch. A timely manner is within a reasonable amount of time of the problem coming up. Obviously, if you're about to go to bed and your partner's going to get up at 5 o'clock the next morning, that's not a timely manner. So you might need to talk about that the next day. But 3 months later, oh, by the way, you did something that really annoyed me 3 months ago. No, that's not a timely matter. Remember, if you've got a question for me on Facebook Live about how to have a constructive argument, you want to perhaps even share a tip that works for you about arguments, it's always good to hear from you and good to pass this on. So my third way of talking in a constructive way is that when you talk about your feelings, I want you to use the I word. Now, what do I mean by that? I feel upset when we have arguments. That would be a very good I statement. The problem with you statements, which is what lots of people use, is you make me feel angry. Well, actually, it's much better to say, I feel angry, because if you say, you make me angry, your partner will immediately get defensive. Another way that it's very important to use I words is, I believe that the best time for children to go to bed is at 7 o'clock. Now, if you say children should go to bed at 7 o'clock, what you're sort of suggesting is all right people think that children should go to bed at 7 o'clock. Well, actually, no, it's actually just between you and I. So if you say, I believe, then you're owning the statement, you're not hiding behind everybody else, and it keeps the argument at a more measured kind of pace. So when you talk, use the I word all the time, as much as possible. And that leads us on to my fourth point. Now, the fourth way to have a constructive argument is to avoid the words that accelerate conflict. I've already given you one of those, and that is should. The minute you say should, you begin to get your partner hot under the collar and the whole conflict is beginning to build. Let me give you some other ones. You must. Must I? I think you're going to find that I'm going to get defensive or even aggressive. Other words, you always leave your towel on the floor. Well, it's probably not true. There might have been one time back in 1967 when he picked it up, and he will remind you about it, and we've gone off the main subject. So always and never, those are other words that escalate the conflict. Other ways of escalating the conflict is taking something like you never pick the towels up off the floor to make it about a character thing. You're lazy, or you don't care about me. Can you begin to see we've got off the towels into our whole relationship? And that is not going to make matters easier. Thank you for your questions. I've already had a couple of questions. I'll be going through those in a moment. It's not too late to post your question, and I'll be answering as many as I have time for. If you're watching this recorded, you can still post a comment because we will be looking at them, and you could make a suggestion for a future episode of Facebook Live. What topic would you like us to cover? So let's go from number 4, which is avoiding words that accelerate conflict, to another one which I've sort of hinted at the moment, which is one topic at a time. Now, if you remember, I said if we're talking about the towels, we could probably sort out the towels on the floor. But if I'm actually throwing in the fact that she or he didn't fill the car up with petrol, and he or she forgot to collect our daughter from school, you can begin to see how we're not going to solve all of those issues. Even though in your mind they might be all connected, we can talk about those other ones at another time. So one issue at a time. Often what people do when they're adding in extra items of ammunition is they either feel they don't have a good case, and if it's something that you feel strongly about, then it is a good case and it does need to be talked about, or they think they're losing the argument and therefore, they're not winning on the towels on the floor, so they say, well, it's all very well for you to criticise me about the towels on the floor, but you never wash up your coffee cups. And suddenly the argument is about two things, and we're not going to solve two things. And it's coming into another one of the things that I want you to avoid to have a constructive argument, is don't try and win. Because if you try and win, you're going to be storing up problems for the future. So we've done 6 of the things that are going to help you have constructive arguments. Surprisingly enough, actually thinking about the argument beforehand and your feelings about it beforehand are not going to help. Because the problem is, if you really think about this and you come up with a solution yourself, what can happen when you start having the argument or the discussion about how to solve the problem of the towels on the floor, it could be that you will start trying to get your partner to agree with your solution. You spent the last 3 hours thinking about a great way of avoiding this problem, and you're going to really push for it really hard. You're going to be closed off. You're not going to be listening. It could be that if you were listening and you weren't actually trying to push your solution, another solution might emerge that came from both of you. So let's look at the 8th thing that is going to help us to have a constructive argument. There's got to be something in it for both people. So it's got to be something that both of you want to solve, and the solution has got to work for both of you. If it's just going to work for me, then actually it's only going to last for a while. So think, what could I do for you? How could this benefit you? If you have that kind of conversation, you will find it become much, much more constructive. Now, this is a really important one. This is number 9 of my 10 things, and then I'll be coming on to answering your questions. I've had 3 in so far, but if you want to put in your question or your comment, there's still time. Give support to your partner during a row. Now, what do I mean by this? What you're trying to tell your partner is, even though we're disagreeing, even though we're having a row, I still love you. And you can do that in all sorts of constructive ways. You can say, oh, that's a very good point you made there. Can you see how that begins to build an alliance? I agree with you on that. Check that you've heard correctly, because sometimes arguments are actually about the fact that you're misunderstanding each other. So, did I hear you rightly when you said that if we cleaned the kitchen on a Monday, we wouldn't have this problem? Excellent. Show that your partner that you're listening to them by repeating back something they've just said. Oh, so you're saying that if we clean the house on Monday, we'll avoid the problems on Tuesday. That makes them feel they're being heard and that their opinions count and are important. So that's another way of giving them support during the row. I've spent 30 years listening to people argue in my room, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: don't rush to the exit. By this I mean, don't try and get the argument over as soon as possible. I know that's what you want to do because you hate arguments. If I'm being totally honest, I hate them too. But if you take your time, you will have a better argument. You won't agree too quickly because you want to get over, because it's all a nasty argument. And when you agree for a quiet life, you're not actually really buying into the solution, and it's only going to be a temporary solution. So you can say, oh, I agree with you about that, but I'm not so sure about that. Keep the argument going for a bit longer. Keep the discussion going for a bit longer. Sometimes 5 minutes makes all the difference with an argument. Have it for another 5 minutes and you will be surprised. You'll often actually reach a solution that works for both of you. So, before I start answering your questions, let me just go back over my 10 things for you to have a constructive argument. Number 1, practice with small issues. Number 2, tackle them in a timely manner. 3, use I statements when you talk about your feelings. I feel rather than you make me feel. You can see you're getting hot under the collar about that one. Avoid words that escalate the conflict. Don't pile on and another thing. Don't make it about your whole relationship when really it's actually only about what school our child should go to. One topic at a time. Tough, but you'll have a chance of solving one of them. You won't solve the whole of your relationship problems in one row. Don't try and win, because it's just a false win. There are no winners in a relationship battle. There are just 2 losers. Don't have your own solution up your sleeve. Let the 2 of you together come up with a solution. 2 heads are always better than 1. Check what's in it for both people. For the solution to stick, there's got to be a benefit for both of you. Give support to your partner during the row. Tell him you love him. I know this is tough, but I love you, and it's wonderful that we're having this argument. Thank you very much. This is really helping me. That would give him support during the argument. He'll stick with it. And don't rush to the exit, because sometimes, because you're uncomfortable, you're trying to get an agreement too quickly, it's not a true agreement. So let's start going through some of your questions and seeing what people would like to ask. So the first one is from Rose and Francis. It's difficult to stay calm in an argument when it's something that you've argued about many times before and there's no change, isn't it? I agree with you. And what I think is really important when you begin to have those kind of arguments is you actually ask yourselves a question. or even ask your partner a question. Actually stop and say, why is this argument so difficult? Why have we had this argument so many times before? All of a sudden, instead of actually trying to convince each other of something, you're actually putting a different hat on. So why is this so difficult? And I think you'll find you'll get some new material. And if you don't leave it so long to have the argument, you might be feeling a little less hot under the collar. That would be my second tip. Tackle it earlier before you've got to the point that you're really seething with it. Oh, thank you for your question. That was really brilliant. So, this is from Caroline. It's tricky to have a discussion when only one party wants to talk, isn't it? Yes! And we have to ask why it's really difficult for your partner to talk. And I would actually ask him that question. Why is it difficult for you to talk about things? If he says, I don't know, I've got a couple of possible reasons that you could ask him. Is it you feel that I'm better at arguing and you're not going to get anywhere? Do you feel it's that I don't listen to you? Is it that your family never had arguments? Or maybe they had such terrible arguments, you're terrified of having an argument? How can I make it easier for you to have to stay? I think the discussion about arguments could open up a whole new way of tackling them. The other thing I would say is really go on giving support to your partner for staying in the row or for having the row or the discussion. Say to him during it, thank you, I really appreciate this. This is really brilliant. This is really working for me. I love you, darling. And I love you the most when you stay and listen to me, because it says that you love me all the time rather than just the nice me that isn't angry about things. If you put it in that way, there's some positives to an argument. You know, it's actually a very intimate thing to do to have an argument with somebody. So I would recommend those solutions. So, who have we got next? Kimberly says, I find it hard when someone refuses to accept they've done anything wrong and deflects. Yep, I agree with you. One of the ways I would suggest tackling that is think about whether you will accept when you've done things wrong yourself. The reason I say this is twofold. One, it's always easier to take the speck out of somebody else's eye rather than the plank out of your own. So if it really bugs you, it might just be something you do yourself. The second thing is, actually, if you model the behaviour you want from your partner, like I made a mistake and I shouldn't have done that, I wasn't listening properly, you might get them to admit their own mistakes. But if you actually say, the problem with you is you never admit your mistakes, they're going to get defensive and they're going to deflect. I hope that helps. Right, the next one is from Linda. So say this has been your pattern for a while, negative arguments, and as a result all discussions about towels on the floor don't even start in any way because one party walks out and declares, hang on a second, I just need to press the see more button, and declares that they're not doing the discussion. How do you pull back from that? I would start off with by thinking about what your part is in these negative discussions. What have you done about these things that have actually been negative and have actually contributed to this? Have a think about it. Let me think, what could it be? It could be something like, I'm not very good at listening. So you go to your partner and you say, darling, I'm sorry that we have arguments that never go anywhere. I've realised it's because I'm not very good at listening. I wondered if next time we had a discussion about the things on the floor and I'm not listening, you could wave at me and I would stop and I would actually listen to your points. actually, do you mind if we actually try that right now and we try and talk about the towels on the floor? It's about resetting the expectations. It's about saying, for example, I've watched this wonderful video and I've realised I've made some terrible mistakes about arguments. Can we try again? This is what I'm going to try and do differently. If you make it about, this is what I'm going to do differently, he's going to feel it's possible for the whole thing to change. If he thinks, oh, it's going to be only different if you change, he's going to be less interested, and he's actually going to be shut off for about all of that. I hope, Linda, that's been helpful to you. Right, and next we've got a message from Sarah. Should we avoid arguing in front of the children? What if the partner starts shouting in front of them? There's a very good question. I love this particular topic. Should we argue in front of the children? Well, I'm going to give you a little admission here. My parents never truly argued in front of me. They did have an occasional snipe, but they never argued. And on one level, that sounds great. But the problem is it doesn't actually arm you to become any good at arguing when you're an adult. You don't know how to have a disagreement. You don't know how to fall out, make up and sort it out. Now, because if you do that in front of your children, that can be really positive because they learn how to have an argument. When your partner gets to shouting, I agree that's not quite so good. Why does he get to shouting would be my next question. What could you do differently that would help him not get to shout, or not help him not get to shouting, because you're not responsible for his shouting, but you are responsible for your half. What are you doing that gets him to the point that he's shouting? Could it be that he feels you're not listening to him? That's why he's saying it again, but louder! Good way to make him know that you're listening is to repeat back what he's just said. So you're angry with me because I left the towels on the floor. In that way, if the two of you are showing that you're listening, that you have a bad moment where one of you shouts and you manage to pull it back, even if it's in front of the children, that's positive because the children learn how to argue. So this has been my 10 ways to have a constructive argument. Thank you to everybody who's taken part. I do hope it's been helpful to you. And if you would like to make a suggestion for future Facebook Lives, all you have to do is put a comment down. My name's Andrew G. Marshall. It's been great talking to you today. Thank you very much for your participation. Spread the word because arguing can be constructive. Bye-bye.